Hello. Welcome to Live with Art. My name is Anna Gammans, and Live with Art are the sessions that I am doing every other Friday, which are me talking to artists and creatives about their practice, about their new ideas, and just generally having a really nice time on a Friday, because I know that it's kind of winding the end of the week down, and it's really lovely to just kind of gauge how people are doing in the creative world and what they're up to and what's happening. It was a project that I wanted to start soon after lockdown because I had the pleasure of speaking to a lot of artists during that time, and everyone was sort of bursting with creativity. So that's where the project started. As I said, welcome. I can see people joining. Hello, welcome to Live with Art with me, Anna Gammans. It's the chat on every other Friday where I get to talk to an artist or a creative about their practice and what they're up to. I don't know if any of you are still at work at the moment. 4 o'clock is kind of a winding down time. Everyone's sort of flagging at 4 o'clock. So thank you for joining. My artist today that I am joined by is Siemon Scamell-Katz, who, if you saw my little intro on my Instagram story, is an artist that I think is going to make us see art differently. That's quite a bold statement to make. But actually, he's got some incredible ideas about the way that we as humans see art. And I think he is going to be a very interesting guest. I can see he's joining now. I'm going to view his request. We're going to... Hopefully that has worked. Also, I will note that Simon is currently in Greece. Hey, there we go. It's working. Hi, Simon.
Hi, Anna. How you doing?
I'm very well. I was just saying that you are currently in Greece. Lucky you. Although apparently the weather's not so nice, which I just found out from Simon. But if the connection is a little bit slow or there's a slight delay, then apologies. But hopefully, fingers crossed, we're gonna have success.
Great. I don't know if you can hear, but 4 o'clock has just run, which means all the church bells are just ringing.
Oh, fantastic. I actually can hear a little bit of church bells. Oh, I love that. It's a little bit of atmosphere. That's quite nice, actually. My studio is very quiet, so I'm enjoying the ambient noises that Greece is producing right now. Simon, welcome. I gave you a brief introduction and I spoke about your work, but you describe yourself as a non-figurative, non-abstract artist. I think a good start to these sessions is always to get the artist to describe their practice for people watching, people listening. So I would love for you to be able to do that.
I guess I would say I work in the Northern European Romantic tradition. My sole interest in, as far as painting is concerned, is in landscape and in capturing landscape. There's clearly in my work towards colour field painters of the 60s and 70s of the last century. But I guess my process is significantly different to theirs. But essentially what I'm trying to do fundamentally is to help the viewer see of landscape in a felt way rather than relying on a figurative representation of a windmill, of a church, of these.
I think that's a fantastic way to describe your work, and we're going to get really into what you actually mean by that, because I had the pleasure of speaking to Simon briefly before, and his ideas are incredibly advanced. He's someone that really knows what he's talking about, and so we're going to really pick apart what you mean by see things in a different way. I would love to find out from you, though, how you became an artist. I know that it wasn't a very obvious route.
So much as I wanted to go to art college when I was 17 or 18, my father said, hobby. And so by a fairly circuitous route, I ended up starting my own business in my mid-20s, which focused on human behavior, and particularly in the world of marketing. So what we were trying to understand was how people shopped, and there was no research. So we started off by putting cameras into stores to film people shopping, and then fairly shortly after that, we found a way of being able to see what people were actually seeing. It's called eye tracking. Some people would be familiar with it, and we asked people to put on as they were then, big headsets. They would walk around the space, and we could see actually what people saw. Now, I carried on painting. And a long story short, 20 odd years later, I sold the business, and I was concentrating full time on painting, but I was struggling to find the voice that I was looking for. And another artist friend of mine said, you need to connect what you were doing in your marketing world with you know what you're doing now. And I kind of went, how? And you know, I realised that I was sort of bumping up against this idea that I knew from my work world, if you like. Uh, Compared to 100 years ago, compared to 50 years ago, we are so saturated with visual imagery that the meaning of those images, in a sense, is dissipated, is lost. And the way that what I then realized with processing thinking was that with what I knew about how people saw and processed information, that actually the key thing was actually to try and to use that knowledge as the basis for paint in a completely different way, trying to communicate an idea of whatever it was that I was trying to capture in a completely different way.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting speaking to an artist about the way that we see, because we don't excuse me, we don't often talk about that. We really talk about what it is that you're seeing rather than the way that you're seeing. And that's what really struck me about what you were doing with your work, which is that you've really picked apart the science of it so that you actually are kind of dictating what it is, or you're actually not dictating, you're giving complete autonomy to the viewer in what they see. And that's really rooted in the science of how we see. You know, you mentioned visual tracking.
Yeah, so I think one of the really fundamental things, and the thing that shocked me when I thought of the training that visual artists have, is that there's no training that I'm aware of the neurobiology of how we see. And
Oh, sorry, Simon, you cut out briefly there. What was that? Sorry.
we walk around with the impression, all of us, that see everything that's in front of us. So in front of me, I've got about 180 degrees, and my impression is that I'm seeing everything that's in front of me.
Mm.
It's very clear when you study vision sciences, is the way that the eye works is fundamentally different to that, in that we take tiny little samples of information from the scene that's in front of us, and our amazing vision processing system creates an impression using what's called foveal vision and parafoveal vision to give the impression that we're watching a TV screen, if you like. Whereas it's very, very quickly just sampling tiny bits of information and then matching that to our visual memory.
For those of you that have just joined, I am talking to Siemon Scamell-Katz. He is an artist, a non-figurative and non-abstract artist, and we're talking about the way that we see, which is a really interesting topic for an artist who is, you know, usually concentrating on what we see. Simon's, that you've really described that incredibly well. Is it fair to say that because our brains are, in a sense, seeing for us, and our brains are sort of adding to the imagery with memory and what it is that, you know, we're sort of used to, what patterns we recognize, is it fair to say that really what we see is completely different from every different person because our brains are a product of our own context and experience?
To some degree, that's true. I mean, the fact is that we all recognize a chair, so that's a collective experience. What is interesting, however, is that our visual memory is built up. So one of the things we talked about the last time we met was that a baby can recognize its own mother visually within about 15 minutes. Mm. And the point of talking about that is that our vision system is continuously saying, what is it? What is it? What is it? What is it? And we learn that chair so that the next time we see it, we don't have to ask the question, what is it? What is it? What is it? Our brains take up about 25% of the energy that we consume. So our systems are designed to minimize the cognitive load of asking that question the whole time. So very, very quickly through our lives, we build up this incredible bank of visual memories, most of which are shared, of course, but one's own experience of I don't know, uh, uh, um, I'll say, I don't know, or a window and so on, have nuances of memory that are unique to your own life experience. Um, but the issue with visual saturation, a lot of which is led, of course, by advertising, is that those images become freighted with both capital and commercial values. And in a sense, they are designed to become shortcuts. But I feel that these icons and symbols have been over quick as shortcuts, so that we stop to see. And as artists, one is always familiar with the idea that when you actually sit down and sketch the vase on the table, you suddenly realize that in your glance at it in your normal life versus your study of it in order to draw it is a fundamentally different experience. And so, what I'm trying to talk about here is instead of the shortcutting of these symbols and icons that we've learned, can we consider what I try and paint, what the viewer sees, therefore, in a different way?
That is so interesting to me, and I hope it's really interesting to the people listening right now, and people that will listen to this. Simon, so your work is very reductive, I suppose. In a way, you're kind of removing the imagery, you're removing the visual cues for us. How does that translate into an artwork? What are we sort of talking about visually when you do that in your practice?
Well, again, as artists, we know that the little mistake you can make, you hold it, let me go like that. Oh, it's an elephant. Example of our brains sort of say, what is that? And so my start point in my attempt in my technical work is to remove anything, as you say, that is symbolic, anything that is iconic, and that's actually really quite difficult to do. So my process is essentially starting. I paint on linear panels. Uh, Part of the reason behind that is simply that the symbolism and meaning of a canvas with a stretcher and a frame carries its own freighted memory as well. Uh, and painting is not with, and then I put a ground of enamel on the enamel then use very, very thin oil glazes that build up over time. Um, and every single brush mark or gesture I try and erase as I go along, so that what you create um, is a sensory color that is my emotional response to whatever it is I'm looking at. And I tend to paint uh, that are,
Sorry, Simon, you cut out a little bit there. Can you say that again? So you tend to paint.
I tend to paint landscapes that are at risk in some way or another. So usually by climate change, because what I'm essentially trying to get to, and when I talk about the Northern European Romanticism, is the sublime in the landscape. Is to now in the 19th century, those guys were they were all guys, of course. Use a landscape to explain the awesome uh, horror and fear of God. I'm just trying to talk about the sublimity of the landscape in my own way, but I say by removing the simple tools that we use, the composition, symbolism, and so forth, the viewer is being asked to work much harder. I walk straight past and say, no, don't get it. Or when you look at it, you so control. So the great thing, so for example, if you look at the greats of composition, Caravaggio, for example, um, he instinctively knew that by using composition, he could tell a linear narrative. There's some eye tracking research that was done by Padua University looking at all the people that were researched, their eye movements, how they consumed the painting, if you like. They all started here, went to there, went to there, went to there. and that was the composition of the story. That Mary looking at Jesus, who was then communicating with, say, whatever the structure of a painting was.
Yeah, Caravaggio really does tell us how to look at an image. It's undeniable.
Yeah. So by removing composition as well, I'm not saying start here or start there. What I'm saying is here is an entity of space that is to do with reflecting a landscape. I'm not guiding you at all, compositionally or by symbolism, to tell a story other than how you might start to sensorily feel your experience of being with that object, that painting.
For those of you just joining, I'm talking to Siemon Scamell-Katz, who is an artist, and he's speaking about the way that we view and the way that we see art is actually is not really our own. Sometimes we're given clues in a lot of artwork about what it is that we're supposed to see. What Simon's trying to do is really reduce the artwork to its instinctual form and its kind of feeling form. I think maybe that's fair to say, and how that translates into your work. Just to summarize how beautifully you just described it, is that you're taking away the composition, you're taking away the very obvious sort of color patterns that we might expect to see. You're really subverting our expectations, and you're asking a lot of the audience, of the viewer, to feel the work, which I think is absolutely fascinating. You also don't have titles in your work. That's for the same reason?
That's very purposeful as well, because particularly with abstract art, there's been quite a lot of research, again, with eye tracking, just simply looking at titles. Work is that the way that people look at a work, if they've seen the title first, or they refer to the title in their consumption, then that will change the way that you look at it. If I've got the idea of man with dog, then the way that our eyes work is task-driven. So if I've got the words man with dog, then I'm looking for man with dog, and I'm going to concentrate on finding man with dog. So titling, for me, is a construct for forming an expectation about how you're going to look at this piece. I've removed that altogether. I just simply have a referencing system that says when in the year was it painted, and that's it. Again, I'm asking the reviewer to work harder, in a sense, in the viewing of.
Sorry, Simon, you just cut out there a little bit. Can you repeat that? You're asking the viewer
To work harder in the viewing of the picture plane.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's incredibly interesting. You mentioned that you really want the viewer to feel what it is that you're describing visually, and that's often landscapes that have some risk of disappearing because of climate change. I know you mentioned when we spoke on the phone that this is a way for you to capture the sublime, and also to quite literally keep records of these places in a different way. I thought that was a really beautiful idea.
To me, that's really important, and the idea of record, the idea of statement. Go back to what we were talking earlier on in the piece. The use of figuration. At the moment, figuration is really important in the communication of identity. But the use of figuration in landscape, for two reasons, is often a shortcut to again not really seeing. And if we're going to make a record of these special places, then we should be asking our viewers to see them, to really see them. The structure of landscape, which of course has influenced so much in film and television, the classic framing of the Turner landscape, going back to Poussin, Claude, all those, the language, the visual language we've learned about how to compose what is a good landscape and what is a bad landscape. Those landscapes are all framed by those repeated structures that are now repeated in television, that are now repeated in film. So shortcut that stops you really seeing. And so by removing that, as well as as I say, the iconography of landscape, a church, a seascape, how can I get into what I am looking at? My brain's continuing to say, what is it? What is it? What is it? And so by the structuring of these very thin oil glazes, which by the very nature of how we see the refraction of light to reflect on these very, very thinly spaced surfaces, almost a kind of movement, uh, because one's eye is just trying to focus at slightly different depths across the refractive landscape of the painting. So actually, as you move around, the way that that technical process works means that those relationships start to change slightly. I can't photograph the work because there's no real one view of the picture, because it,
Sorry, Simon, that cut out slightly, but I think I know what you said, which is that it's hard to photograph the works because the view is constantly shifting and changing with the light. And I think that's absolutely fascinating. Firstly, it's just so multi-layered, because actually, if we go back to the science of what we're talking about here, we as human beings are all going to see your work completely differently, not only depending on where we're standing in the room, but really what signals our brains are receiving about what we're seeing and what we're feeling, more importantly, as well. So really everyone's experience of your art, and I say that word, it really feels to match what we're talking about here. Everyone experiences your work very differently, and it can't be seen the same by anyone because the clues have all been taken. You're really relying on the viewer to actually determine what it is that they're sensing from what you're giving them. I have to ask, so you had an exhibition, it was called, I have the name of it here, I don't want to get it wrong, Vanishing Sublime, which quite literally, we've talked about the sublime, we've talked about, the 19th century and 20th century romanticism and the idea of the sublime. What was that exhibition like? Because I can only imagine for a viewer, it's a different kind of experience, that exhibition, your work.
there was several interesting things. One, there was sort of 35 odd across 3 rooms, and during the day, of course, the light conditions in the gallery space changed the whole time. So people that came several times said, I really liked painting 2004, but when I came back,
It's changed.
because the sunlight had come, or whatever. I think one of the common things that people said and commented on was the stillness, that this way of consuming, or this is a horrible word, but this way of looking at art, of this specific art, the stillness of the experience of standing in front of this work, particularly looking at it in reference as the works refer to itself. So a lot of the work that I've done, and one of the rooms was the East Anglian salt marshes, painted at different times of year, different times of day, and people came away from there feeling that that a lot of people said they'd actually felt that they'd been there, which is obviously the aim of what those things are trying to do, what those paintings are trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is so interesting. You're getting people not to see your exhibition, but to feel your exhibition, which is interesting. And again, something that with a visual artist is really rare. So I just think that that's fantastic. I wonder whether have you had people's reactions, when you don't have titles, you don't have visual clues, nothing really meets expectation. Do you have people coming up to you and saying, oh, I can't see anything, like I can't see the title. What is this?
There is some frustration because a lot of people just have untitles and so forth, but slightly a frustration in that these, again, it goes back to our learned behaviours. These I learned to expect to see is titled pictures, is so. There was a degree of that. Once you helped people into the explanation of what the work is about and what it's trying to do, then one can feel a bit more relaxed, perhaps.
Absolutely. And obviously, so this show was back in September of this year, your exhibition in Norfolk. where are you now with your work? What's the next stages of what you're doing? And I know from evidence that you're extremely busy.
So we spent most of the summer in Greece. My partner and I were over here, escaping lockdown, thankfully, looking at marble. People have gone to a marble quarry on the island of Tinos, and we had an amazing experience of being taken around there by a 96-year-old guy who's not only he spent his whole life in this quarry, but his father and his grandfather's grandfather had all been in this one place on this one island. And the quarry itself dates back 3,000 years. So some of the marble that's in some of the ancient Greek temples came from this place. So there's this amazing, again, this place of record. And this record is actually of the hill disappearing as it's mined for the marble. And so I'm now working on a response to that work around the idea of marble, the pressure that creates it, how it's formed, and then it's changelessness once it is there. Okay, we can start to carve it and sculpture it, but essentially it becomes inert. And so I'm working towards an exhibition next April in Paris, where the paintings in response to
Sorry, Simon, that cut out slightly. In response to
paintings of the Tinos quarry and generally in Greece will be on show.
Fantastic. Paris, Greece, all the best places. I'm extremely envious. Are you using the same materials? We spoke briefly about your use of materials. I think some of it we slightly lost. I think the signal was a bit dodgy, but you mentioned your materials, you mentioned layering. Will you be transitioning that style into this next project?
Totally. So I'm very passionate about the craft of pipe painting, and a lot of the development that I've done in creating this way of painting is based on Turner and how he created his oil paintings, Monet, his antiquary as well. And so that technical craft of building up these these layers of oil, and of course because it's on aluminium, it doesn't evaporate in the same way it does on canvas. So each wash can take 1-2 weeks to dry. So these paintings there's a really interesting temporal relationship in the process of painting and in the thinking of what I am working with. Some of the paintings take over a year to create. Although, given that I've got an exhibition next April,
Chop, 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 chop. Fantastic. And we've mentioned that your work's actually particularly difficult to photograph because of the shifting light and the fact that it changes constantly. And I remember speaking to you on the phone a couple of weeks ago, and you brilliantly summarized it by saying that often people say about artworks, oh, why would you paint that when you could just take a photograph? Whereas actually, and you said beautifully that actually you can't take a photograph of my work. It's something that the camera can't capture.
Sorry to interrupt. It feels like
no.
photography, when photography arrived, that on landscape painting was fundamental on painting overall, but landscape painting particularly. So for me, it's kind of really lovely that it's photographically difficult now to capture the paintings.
And with that in mind, you definitely need to go and see Simon's work in Paris, I guess, now. Fantastic excuse to go to Paris. Simon, I have absolutely loved speaking to you. I know one thing I definitely need to ask you is, so obviously, we mentioned, your work is kind of landscape based, I suppose, but not really. And you're moving on to marble, and looking at kind of the properties and how to feel and experience that as a material. Obviously, your work is very tied to climate change. is that going to continue? Is this something that you use in your work, these themes, to talk about that political side of things?
We talked about this idea of record earlier on, and I think this is really important for all of us as artists to be thinking about. And we mentioned earlier about the role of figure eight, expressions of identity. That's a way of record and changing perhaps the way people see identity in that way. And I'm looking to do the same thing. To this idea of record and the work that I'm doing with Greek islands is the same idea of record of places that are under threat, and yeah, that's the fundamental parts of it.
I find it really interesting that actually you reference very kind of traditional practices for what I would consider as being a very untraditional way of working, which I think is absolutely fascinating. I mean, it's the role of an artist, right, to use what inspires them and completely reinvent it and recreate it, which I think you've done through your own lens and by extension through our individual lenses. It's a really interesting relationship. I'm so happy that we got to speak to you today. And besides Paris, where can viewers, anyone watching this, go to find out more about you and what you're doing?
So I've got a website where the work is photographed.
But you have to see it live, both.
The wonderful Anna Arca, who's the photographer of the National Gallery, came and shot the work, which was a really brilliant experience. And just wonderful to watch her going,
which angle do I choose?
But my name, Siemon Scamell, all one word, .com, is my website. You can see a record of the last 4 or 5 years' work on there. I'm on Instagram as well, Scamell_Katz. Yes, hopefully we'll see you in April in Paris.
Absolutely. And yeah, for anyone that didn't quite catch Simon's full name, it is, well, it's in the feed. You should be able to see it. I'm going to do a description of this video as well at the end, so you'll be able to find Simon and his work via his handle and obviously via your website too. Simon, enjoy Greece. I'm very jealous that you're in Greece. And I hope the weather picks up for you. As I said, it's absolutely rubbish here as usual. Thank you so much for talking to me. If there is anyone listening that wants to get involved with Live with Art, please do send me a message and look out for Simon's work. Thank you so much, Simon, for talking to me. And I'll see you all in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.